Before you hear this story, remember one thing. The most terrifying people aren't the ones who break into your room. They're the ones already living inside it. This is one of the creepiest dorm room encounters I've ever come across, and to this day, no one truly knows what that girl was capable of. Welcome to Real Night Horror. I spent my entire childhood in a quiet hillside town tucked inside eastern Colorado, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and life moved slowly. When I graduated high school, I enrolled in a small private university located about 20 minutes away from my hometown. I'd rather not mention its name because I don't want anyone tracing it back. This all happened in 2022, when COVID restrictions were still messing with campus life and most freshmen were choosing off-campus apartments instead of dorm rooms. I didn't have the money for that kind of luxury, so I stayed in the nearly empty dorm building and drove home every weekend since my house was close enough. I still wanted that real dorm experience, though, so I tried to be optimistic. On move-in day, I finally met the girl the school assigned as my roommate. We had exchanged a few messages earlier because the housing office had weirdly given her my number before giving me hers. She came across friendly in texts, but in person, she spoke softly, barely made eye contact, and had this strange, entitled calmness about her. During one of our first conversations, she casually mentioned that before I arrived, she had the whole room to herself because there were so few students living on campus that semester. Her tone made it sound like I had intruded on a privilege she expected to keep, and I didn't know how to respond, so I awkwardly changed the subject. I told her I usually left for the weekend every Friday and returned on Monday morning around 6 a.m., and she just nodded. Most weekdays, she spent the night with her boyfriend in his room across another building, so the place felt even emptier than it already was. That's why what happened next was so unsettling. On my very first Monday morning after going home for the weekend, I came back at my usual time, dropped my bag, and crawled back into bed since my first class wasn't until 10. I had barely been lying there for 10 minutes when I felt the lower corner of my mattress sink down as if someone had leaned onto it. At first, I didn't even react. I was exhausted and half asleep. But then the weight lifted again, and the realization snapped me fully awake. My heart thudded in my chest as I whipped my head around, only to see my roommate lying perfectly still on her own bed, turned toward the wall like she was fast asleep. Thinking maybe I imagined it, I tried to brush it off, but the second weekend proved that something was terribly wrong. The following Monday, I repeated the same routine, came back at dawn, climbed into bed, and tried to catch a couple hours of sleep. This time, the mattress didn't just dip at the edge, an entire section of my bed sagged under a clear, unmistakable weight. Someone sat right next to me. I froze, afraid to breathe. Then I heard it, feet hitting the floor as though someone jumped off my tall bed. My bed required a step stool to climb, so whoever had been there wasn't just lightly shifting the mattress, they had been fully perched beside me. Terrified, I looked around the room. Once again, she was lying in her own bed, motionless, facing the wall. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was overtired, maybe hallucinating, but something in my gut kept warning me it wasn't normal. The third Monday confirmed my worst fears. When I walked into the dorm room after another weekend away, she was already in bed. This time facing my side of the room, I quietly climbed into my own bed and shut my eyes. 5 minutes later, I felt it again. The heavy pressure sinking into the mattress. Someone sat beside me with deliberate slowness, and I clenched my eyes shut so tightly it hurt. Then, a cold hand settled on the back of my neck. It didn't grip or squeeze. It simply rested there, as if testing me, waiting to see if I would react. I don't know how long I lay there, barely breathing, trying not to scream. Eventually, the hand lifted and the weight disappeared from my bed. I stayed frozen, too terrified to turn around. When I finally gathered the courage to look, she was lying in the exact same position as before, facing the wall, perfectly still. I grabbed my bag and left the room without even putting on shoes. I called my mother from the hallway, shaking so hard I could barely speak. My mom contacted the school immediately, and by the afternoon, I was moved into a different dorm on another floor. The administration even asked if I wanted to involve the police, but I didn't. I had no solid proof, and the thought of confronting her scared me even more. I only asked them to ensure she wouldn't get a new roommate. After settling into my new room, small memories began resurfacing. She once mentioned her previous roommate left suddenly, but offered no explanation. Another time, she casually unlocked a drawer and revealed stacks of prescription bottles, at least a dozen, claiming they were for a skin condition, though none of the labels looked like dermatology medications. Looking back, I wonder if she was lying, or if the side effects were far more disturbing than she admitted. A few days after moving out, she texted me saying I had left a book and a binder. I didn't even want them back, but avoiding her completely felt riskier, so I agreed to quickly grab them. My old key still worked, so I slipped into the room while praying she wasn't there. She wasn't, until I turned around to leave and found her blocking the doorway without making a sound. I hadn't even heard the door unlock. She stared at me silently, and I forced myself to smile. When I tried to pass her, she suddenly asked what my new room number was. I lied and said it was on the first floor. She kept pressing. Which hallway? Near the stairs? Near the office? Which side of the building? Her questions kept getting more specific, like she was trying to map out my exact location. I lied again and again, said I didn't remember, then slipped past her as calmly as I could. I never saw her again. Sometimes I wonder if it was sleepwalking, or medication, side effects, or something darker. But the way she kept appearing silently, the way my bed indented with deliberate weight, and especially the cold hand on my neck, none of that felt like sleepwalking. My mom believes she was testing how close she could get before I woke up, and that the morning I felt her hand, she might have been deciding whether to choke me or not. I don't know the truth. I just pray she never shared another room with anyone again. During my final year at a small, low-key university tucked in the outskirts of North Shore Valley, where I studied from 2020 to 2022, something happened that still leaves me uneasy whenever I think about late-night buildings. The school wasn't exactly a party hub, so students often spent long nights scattered across the quieter buildings, especially the older ones with 24/7 access. I was never the type to stay out past midnight, but during that semester, I didn't really have a choice, mostly because I had enrolled in an upper-level research analytics module taught by a professor who practically weaponized deadlines and monstrous projects. One particular assignment was due at 8 a.m. the next morning, and I wasn't even halfway through. My own laptop had been glitching all week, random shutdowns, freezing, everything. So, out of desperation, I decided to work in one of the campus buildings called the Meridian Block, a three-floor academic building that sat slightly away from the rest of campus. It always felt too quiet, like the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but unnatural, sterile and hollow. Because the building's second-floor computer room was usually empty after 9 p.m, I figured it would be ideal to concentrate. That night, around 10:05, I reached the building. Even before I stepped inside, the stillness outside felt calmer than what greeted me indoors. The moment my ID card beeped and the door clicked open, a sharp wave of cold air wrapped around me, and the hall smelled overwhelmingly of harsh disinfectant, meaning the cleaning crew had already finished their shift much earlier. I walked past the deserted lobby, climbed the stairs, and slipped into the dim computer lab, choosing a workstation by the wall. For the first hour or so, nothing felt wrong. The hum of the desktop under the desk, the faint whir of the ceiling vents, and the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard blended into a background white noise that kept me grounded. I kept checking the time in the corner of the screen, reminding myself that if I left before 1 a.m, I'd still get some sleep. But at around 11:35 p.m, that's when things shifted. While I was flipping through some datasets, a loud, abrupt slam echoed somewhere deep in the hallway. Not from the main entrance, but beyond, deeper inside the building. At first, I told myself it was just an air pressure shift or one of the leftover custodial doors closing slowly. But then I remembered, the cleaning staff were always gone by 9. I forced myself to ignore the noise and refocused on my assignment, but only a minute or two passed before another sound joined the stillness. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, moving down the hallway outside the lab. They weren't light like a student, and they weren't confident like faculty. It felt like someone walking intentionally loudly, as if to make their presence known. I kept typing, pretending I didn't notice, but my hands had already gone tense on the keyboard. The footsteps grew closer until they stopped right outside the lab door. There's a small window on the door that I could have used to see out if I leaned back slightly, but I couldn't make myself look. For several seconds I sat frozen, barely breathing. Then the door handle rattled. Not gently, not like someone checking if the room was in use. It was a firm, unsettling shake, repeated, forceful, insistent, like whoever was out there was trying to startle me. Or get in. I reminded myself that after 10 p.m, the lab doors auto-locked, but that didn't make the situation feel any safer. The rattle went on, maybe 25 or 30 seconds before stopping completely. Then the footsteps resumed, slow again, fading down the hall until I couldn't hear them anymore. I debated packing up and leaving right then, but the project was due in a few hours, and I tried convincing myself that maybe it was just some student playing a prank, or someone who didn't realize the lab got locked after hours. Trying to calm down, I returned to my work. But barely 10 minutes later, another sound chilled me to the bone, a faint dragging, shifting noise. Not from the hall this time, but from above me. The Meridian block had those thin, flimsy ceiling tiles that sometimes groaned when the heating kicked in, but this wasn't mechanical. It was unmistakably the sound of weight shifting across the panels, like someone crawling, slow and careful, directly above the room. I stared upward, my heart pounding, and watched as one of the tiles near the corner dipped just slightly under pressure. A small creak followed, like whoever, or whatever, was moving overhead was trying to lower themselves quietly. That was my breaking point. I yanked out my flash drive, grabbed my notebook, stuffed everything into my bag, and bolted out of the room. The hallway outside felt colder than it should have been, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like dying insects. My footsteps echoed too loudly as I walked as fast as I could without outright sprinting toward the stairwell. The moment I pushed open the stairwell door and started descending, I made the terrible mistake of glancing upward. Standing on the landing just one floor above me was a man, if you could even call him that. He clearly wasn't a student. His clothes hung off him in loose, dirty folds, ripped at the sleeves, and his posture looked wrong, stiff, almost puppet-like. Half his face was swallowed by shadow, but the part I could see revealed his jaw hanging unnaturally slack, stretched into a disturbingly wide grin. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He just stared directly at me. I didn't wait a second longer. I practically flew down the stairs, stumbling at one point, but catching myself, bursting out through the first floor door, tearing down the hall, and racing to the main entrance. My ID barely registered fast enough to unlock the door, but the moment it clicked, I shoved it open and sprinted across the campus grounds without once looking behind me. I didn't slow down until I was inside my dorm room, door slammed, locked, and my back pressed against it as I tried to breathe normally again. The next morning, I had no choice but to return to the Meridian block to submit my assignment in person. Walking into the building during daylight felt bizarrely normal, almost comforting, until I reached the second floor. That's when I noticed it. 2 ceiling tiles were missing. One was directly above the workstation I had used. The other was the exact corner tile I had seen shift before I ran. It looked as though someone had been up there, watching through the ceiling as I worked, then trying the door, and once failing to get in, retreating back into the crawl space to move toward a different entry point. I don't want to imagine what would have happened if I had stayed even a minute longer. Needless to say, I'm getting a new laptop, and from now on, every assignment I have will be done inside my dorm room with the door locked and nowhere near that cursed building ever again. My name is Clara. I'm 21 now and living in Scotland, but when this happened I was a quiet 16-year-old who had barely begun attending a newly constructed secondary school that looked enormous from the outside, even though only a portion of it was for mainstream students, the rest split between a learning support centre and a nursery, and although this was years ago, the memory still sits in my chest like a weight I can't fully get rid of. My school made us wear ID lanyards that looked cheap but controlled almost every door in the building. Classrooms were open, but the hallways, cafeteria access points, and inner hall doors all required you to tap your ID on a black scanner to unlock them. Visitors could walk into the front foyer freely, but beyond that area, you needed a proper ID to get anywhere, and during our orientation, we were sternly told never to open doors for people we didn't recognize, no matter how harmless they looked. This all happened during my second actual full day of classes because I had been sick most of the previous week, and that particular day was an all-day geography block. Around 20 minutes after lunch, I realized chugging that huge cafeteria bottle of juice had been a mistake because it hit me hard and suddenly I almost couldn't sit still. Usually, we weren't allowed to leave class during lessons, but my teacher could tell I genuinely needed to go, so he reluctantly let me slip out. The hallways were silent, eerily so, because once lessons began, the entire building felt deserted, almost like the world emptied itself out. Except for you, I remember scanning through the double doors into the cafeteria, the room so empty and still that every footstep I made echoed back at me. I moved through it, crossed into the secondary hallway, used the bathroom quickly, then pushed back through the door into the cafeteria again. But this time there was someone sitting alone at one of the tables. He looked older, too old to be a student, and he wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, hands clasped, staring at nothing in particular. At first I didn't think much of it because occasionally adults cut through the cafeteria, but something about the way he sat there made my nerves twitch when he suddenly said, "Hey." I practically squealed because I'm easily startled. He laughed softly and apologized, and in that moment I noticed he had a lanyard around his neck, so I assumed he was a teacher I hadn't met yet. I didn't think about how odd it was that the ID was flipped backwards so you couldn't see his name or face. Students did that constantly, but teachers almost never did. Then he casually asked if I could help him grab some work materials from his car because he needed an extra pair of hands. It didn't occur to me to question it. I was a shy kid who never wanted to seem rude, so I just said yes. We walked through the foyer in complete silence, and with every step I became more aware of how off his energy felt. Teachers always chat casually when you walk with them, but he didn't. Instead, he kept fidgeting, pushing his hands into his pockets, taking them out, cracking his knuckles, rubbing his palms together. I didn't say anything either because my social anxiety convinced me silence was safer. Outside there was a long stretch, maybe 50 meters, before you reached the car park, and bushes lined the entire path so you couldn't see a single car until you were practically beside them. If you walked straight instead of turning left into the lot, you'd walk off school grounds. As we approached the car park, he said his gear was in the boot of a blue car at the very back. At first, I noticed something faint in the back seat. Just movement, like shifting shadows, but each step made it clearer, and when we were close enough, I realized with a jolt of cold panic that there were two grown men crouched down in the back seat, watching me through the window. My entire body locked up, and the instant they realized I had seen them, the back door flew open and one of the men lunged out toward me. At the same time, the man beside me grabbed my arm as I tried to run, and he was tall, heavy, and stronger than me by a long shot. Yet the terror that hit me must have triggered every last ounce of strength in me, because somehow I ripped my arm out of his grip and sprinted toward the school. I could hear footsteps, several sets, slamming against the concrete behind me, and I knew that if they committed fully to chasing me, they would catch me in seconds, because the foyer doors were slow, heavy glass automatic ones that took a moment to slide open, but thank God they stopped halfway. Maybe afraid someone inside would look through the transparent doors and see them. Maybe afraid of being caught. After we kids were asleep, my aunt finally revealed to my parents and uncle the secret she had kept buried for more than a decade. Her first marriage, not to a physically abusive man, but to one who had slowly and cleverly isolated her, cutting off her access to money, removing the phone, tossing out food item by item, and finally abandoning her overnight until she begged strangers for change to call my grandmother for rescue. She had sworn my grandmother never to tell anyone, moved states away afterward, met my uncle, rebuilt her life, and assumed her ex was long gone, maybe even dead. But he had tracked her down after 10 silent years, driven to her house with a gun and 2 full cans of gasoline, intending, according to what investigators told them later, to shoot everyone inside and then burn the place down. He went to prison, though not long enough for anyone's liking, and while a restraining order now ensures he'll be re-imprisoned if he ever returns to that town, the fact that he is still alive, now somewhere around his 70s, just like my parents and aunt, leaves a razor-thin thread of dread hanging over everything. Everyone hopes age alone will keep him away, but to me it feels less like certainty and more like a fragile wish, like a blade suspended above us that hasn't fallen yet, and the chilling fear that my aunt's nightmare, which has already resurfaced twice, won't truly be over until the day her ex draws his final breath, because God help us all if it ends with anyone else losing their life instead of him.